Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Safe Travels podcast. My name is Joey. Today, we are at Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, and we sat down with park ranger and archaeologist Ree Rodgers. Ree and I chatted all about archaeology and the human history here at the Great Sand Dunes. Ree, you are the first and only archaeologist here at Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, and so I'm super excited to talk to you.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here, Joey. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. I'm excited because I think we've met with every member of the resource team here at the park. And so I am thrilled to learn about archaeology. So maybe we start this podcast with the most basic form and the most basic question of what archaeology is and how do you perform your role specifically in this park.
So archaeology is the study of material remains left by past cultures, and there's a lot of methods we use to get at information about those cultures, those people that used to live in a place and how they lived and how long they lived there, what they did. And the great thing about archaeology specifically is that it can reveal the lives of everyday people that weren't written about. It's about getting to the story of people that weren't part of the ruling elite, that weren't part of the military campaigns that get, sung about and written about, and all of those documents that tend to be what we consider history are more about, the voices of the people who were ruling, So archaeology can reveal all of the stories about the people that were just like you and I, just living their life and doing things. And so we have a lot of methods that we use to get at that, like, we have dating methods to establish chronology. We have all of these different, we try to collect the same information from every site so we can bring it all together and establish chronologies across landscapes and across, entire continents. And you can learn a lot about the similarities of humans in different places, which I think is super interesting, how a lot of the time people will come up with the same ideas in different spots. And it's because we have the same brain, Our brains haven't changed in 50,000 years. So we have the same brain and we adapt, and we're incredibly adaptive species. And so we get at that. Those stories, we get at how did people feed themselves, and we look at botanical samples, and we do, float samples, which take, macrobotanical, remains out of soil, and we can get at like carbon dating those samples, and we can get at like analyzing their pollen, and all these things that we use to get at like how people fed themselves, what their economy was like, how they lived. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I can tell when we had our conversations off camera, and just with that very first question, you care deeply about archaeology, you care deeply about people, past and present, and learning about them. What got you excited about archaeology? When did you first decide that this is the profession or field that you wanted to get into?
Oh, I think it was in when I was doing my undergrad work at the University of Oklahoma. I took a lot of classes about the Maya and the Aztec and the Inca, and I started traveling to Mexico and visited several of those sites, and I was just fascinated by how involved and complicated these civilizations were. And then I started learning about I took a ethnology of the American Southwest class, and that was taught by an archaeologist. He was actually the father of one of the kids I went to school with in high school. So Dr. Pales. Anyway, he talked all about this. This they lived in a pueblo. And I'm not sure which one now. I don't remember. But they talked about how this group would have like a 3-day drunk, basically, and the whole pueblo would shut down, and they made prickly pear wine out of prickly pear fruit and fermented it. And then they would put all the kids and the youngsters up on the roof, and so they would be safe, from all the melee that was going on in the village below. And and then they would just have this festival for 3 days and party it up, kind of like our Mardi Gras, I think. So I was just like enchanted by that story. And I was like, this is great. I want to learn about all these people that came before. And growing up in Oklahoma, we learned all the sad stories about how Indian territory came to be. And so that was really interesting. And I started working for an archaeologist during the school year doing seismic line surveys. It was mostly like oil pipelines, and because it was Oklahoma and Texas, and well pad surveys and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, well, I like to be outside. That's cool. And I like to learn about all these different people. I was always fascinated by different cultures. I like to travel a lot. And so it seemed like a good fit, and then I went to grad school at the University of West Florida, and I did mostly Spanish colonial and research and maritime history. And so that's a good fit for here. That's kind of how I came here because of all the Spanish exploration and funny stories that some of the sad, a lot of history is sad, but there's also a lot of humor in it because we're just people on this planet wandering around, acting like we know stuff, but we don't, Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to dive deep into the history of this park and your specific work here and what you've been able to uncover so far. But I do want to ask you this, I guess, almost like philosophical question. I think nowadays as humans, we're distracted by so many things. And so because we're distracted by so many things, technology, our phones, I think it's super easy for us just to live in the present moment and only care about our modern day civilization and the people within our last decade or so. How do you think learning about the people of centuries ago, thousands of years ago, can help reframe and reshape our mindset in life and allow us to live a more fruitful life, knowing what and who came before us?
If you pay a lot of attention to what's going on, and you read enough stories about how people have continued to evolve on this planet, a lot of our stories are the same. We have these cyclical trends in our culture and throughout history where, people like to try to exert power over other humans and what that looks like. and it always ends badly, and then the cycle starts over. So you see like people accumulate a lot of wealth, and you can see this in the archaeological record. You can see how societies will develop, and they'll focus their energy on a certain resource. And as a result of that, all these other things happen. They get really creative material culture. You start seeing a lot of jewelry and a lot of, embellishment of household goods, and pottery styles start to become really beautiful and involved. And in that usually depicts, a culture that's wealthy, right? And as it grows and changes, that wealth gets consolidated. And then something will happen and it'll all go away, something bad, usually. Either the environment will change, or the resources will deplete. And this is the story of humans. I mean, it gets me all verklempt. But yeah, we do this over and over and over, and we're kind of seeing this now. And I think if we paid attention, if we had more, active historical education that wasn't just about dates, here we need to know this date and this date and this date. If we started to teach trends, if we started to use examples of like, this has happened in this culture and this is happening in our culture, and you see the parallels and you see how it ended for those people, and you can draw conclusions from what's happening with us, I think that's really important. If we can get at the truth of human behavior, and sometimes we don't have written records, and then in those spaces we can use archaeological research to illuminate what we're seeing, in the space of the absence of written records. We can draw a lot of conclusions, and it'll help us understand kind of where we're headed. Yeah.
Beautifully said. And, I don't blame you for getting emotional about, talking about something that you love so deeply and so passionately. I think that resonates really well with people who, are into archaeology or into the human story. I think what you just shared is really powerful. So thank you on that. But let's dive deep into Great Sand Dunes and the story that's unfolded in these beautiful mountains and in this beautiful valley, and of course in these sand dunes right behind us. So from a high level overview, if you could take me back as far as you can go on the human story in this park up until modern day.
First off, I will say that I am honored to and acknowledge that I live and work in a place of that at least 29 federally recognized tribes claim ancestral heritage to. We have, I think, positive tribal relationships, and that story goes back as at least 12,000 years that we know here in the park. We have a site in the southern area of the park that was excavated by the Smithsonian, and it showed that people were hunting the bison antiquus, which were huge, like megafauna bison, late Ice Age bison. And we have all kinds of other critters that we know were wandering around here, like the Columbian mammoth, the three-toed sloth, and all those captivating critters that we hear about in stories. They were all here in the valley, and we have some sites here in the park that reveal that. They were hunting with atlatls, because it was before the bow and arrow came to be. And you can still see dental enamel from the bison from the kill site on the surface that's 12,000 years old. Dental enamel from teeth. Crazy. But we know those people were here, and this area was a wetland for most of the year, which is weird because we're a high desert valley, but we have a lot of water. It's real strange, but it drew a lot of critters here, and because of that, it also drew a lot of people. So moving up through time, we have Pueblo, a lot of Pueblo groups that were here, Puebloan tribes, utilizing the springs and doing a lot of grain harvest, processing of grain into flour. We have Indian rice grass grows really abundantly here in the valley, and that made like a really great flour for breads. And we had a lot of bird species. We find a lot of very, very tiny projectile points like this big that were used for hunting birds. Moving on up, we have the Ute that moved in, and they were they're related to the Pueblos. They're also related to the Apaches. All the tribes were kind of interrelated here. The Navajo were here later, and the Navajo have one of their sacred mountains is Mount Blanca. That was the easternmost mountain that marked the corner of their homeland. The Apache, the Jicarilla Apache, have they marked their boundary by rivers, and so the Arkansas and the Rio Grande were two of their rivers. So we have like a long story, and then we had the Spanish start to make little forays here into the valley. We have documents of De Anza's campaign through, he was looking for Cuerda Verde, who was the leader of the Comanche, and so they marched through the valley all in like 2 weeks, from Santa Fe through the valley up through the pass near Salida, and then back down the Front Range and back to Santa Fe in like 2 weeks. Can you imagine? Like on foot. And they were on horseback. I mean, crazy. That's a long way to travel in 2 weeks on foot. So, and over the mountains. And then we had, so that was New Spain, that was after the Spanish moved in, started claiming territory. So this was part of New Spain, where we were sitting on right now, was once Spain. And then Mexico asserted its independence in, I think, 1821. So then we were Mexico, right? Now we're Mexico. And we have a lot of Hispanic farmers coming in, sheep ranchers. They were growing crops and running sheep, and had a pretty good stay of it. We have the Trujillo homestead, which is a National Historic Landmark here at the edge of the park. Not technically in the park, but it's at the edge. And part of their acreage is in the park. So they have a long, complicated history here in the valley because as we move forward, they moved in like 1870s, I think. So fast forward in 1848. Mexico and in the United States came to the end of the Mexican-American War by signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and now we're sitting in the United States, right? Well, all those same people are still here, and they're still living their lives, except now we have more Euro-American settlers moving in. They started to run cattle, and that really clashed with the way sheep are ranched. Cattle ranching is kind of contrary to sheep ranching, and so we have the range wars, and there was a lot of just a whole culture clash of people like fighting for the use of this land, and there was a lot of trauma and horrible things that happened as a result of that. This is what happens with humans, we want to claim territory, and if there are other humans here, we try to, there's always fights, there's always battles. And then we have a lot of other settlers that move in and settled up in the high country along the Medano Pass, and those were the Herards that settled in like 1880s, early 1890s. And he was called the Mad Frenchman. His name was Ulysses Herard, and his father, I believe, was Francois Herard, and they had a whole ranch up in the high country, like 9,000 feet, and they had fish farms, and they grew crops, and they ran cattle down here in the dunes. And there's a lot of stories there. There are whole photos we have in our museum collections of Herard and his family, and all of their hunting parties, and all of these animals that they were, processing from their hunt. So they had a really good time here. And then some people bought some cabins farther down the Medano Pass Road that Herard's family had built, and they were named the Shockies. And the remnants of those cabins are still here. And we have the Wellingtons that had a homestead. I don't know much about them, except they had a homestead kind of near the visitor center, a little bit higher up. And there's the Wellington Canal is here. And that was an irrigation canal. There are a lot of irrigation canals. Oh, God. I mean, that was the one thing, when I moved to the West, as an archaeologist, we end up having to document a lot of irrigation canals because water is a big deal here, and it's still a big deal. It was a big deal then, back in the day, and it's still a big deal, and people still fight over it. So there's a lot of irrigation canals. A lot of the very first water right in Colorado is here in San Luis Valley, called the San Luis People's Ditch. That's got a lot of cool stories attached to it. So water, land, I mean, anytime you get those things coming together, a lot of critters, that's where you're going to find people. And then, things happen. Yeah.
Well, how about the role that gold also played in these sand dunes and bringing and attracting people here to, excavate the gold that's in these dunes behind us?
Yeah. So Fred knows this better than I. There's a certain percentage of gold in the sand. Just like we have magnetite in the sand, we have gold. And it erodes, out of the San Juan Mountains, and blows over across the valley, stacks up right here. This massive pile of sand right here, which was probably a landmark for thousands of years for literally everyone that came through here, because it's unusual. They're the largest dunes, tallest dunes in North America. It's the only dune field that I know of like this in Colorado, and for probably quite a long stretch along the Rockies. You just don't find many places like this. So it's probably really easy to find for a lot of people. The gold that brought a lot of people to Colorado, the big gold rush. That fever set in, took root, right? So around 1920s, sometime in the 20s, we had gold mining interest start to pay attention to the dunes and go, hey, this is really easy. It's just right here. We could just filter the gold out of it, make tons of money, right? Well, luckily, there was a really active women's organization here in the valley. And this was right after women got the right to vote. So they started organizing and saying, hey, this is a great resource. We don't want it trashed by mining interests. We don't want it to turn into a big, pit mine, right? They saw other things that were going on. And so they rallied and they petitioned and they got approval using the Antiquities Act that this could be a national monument. So we got it preserved as a national monument. And so that was really limited to, it was about 35,000 acres or so, just limited to the dune field and the surrounding, I think, sand sheet, part of the sand sheet that feeds the dunes. And then, as a result of all that, people became more interested in the water. As I said before, it's the West, it's really dry here. We're a high desert, but we have a lot of water. And so people started paying attention and wanting to siphon water out of the valley. And so the process that creates these dunes is a continuous cycle of wind and water. So we were able to preserve the whole system that keeps the dune field stable as a part of a national park in 2000.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to back up to your previous answer before that one of how in-depth and incredible of an answer it was, showcasing all the history that's occurred here. But one thing that's amazing about this landscape is that it's always changing. Right now, with this wind picking up, there's sand whipping across the dunes. So does an ever-changing landscape make it difficult to uncover stories like you had laid out?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, I mean, the stratigraphy here, stratigraphy in the way archaeologists like to examine does not exist here. We've got like dune deposits, the dune field itself, which is, I don't know, 1,000 feet deep, something like that. Andrew knows all these details. But then the sand sheet that feeds the dunes is constantly moving. It's vegetated. They're kind of semi-stable dunes, but they move and undulate and trickle and creep and expand and blow out and do all these crazy things that reveal deposits below them, below the initial, few feet of sand, just bare sand. And it's really, really hard to figure out chronology in an environment like this. Like if you're looking at a site, it's really, really hard to, we usually uncover things in levels, 10 centimeter levels. We'll take an excavation pit and we set up an excavation unit, usually based on a feature that we observe on the surface or we know is there from shovel testing. So we'll set up a unit and you start uncovering it level by level. Well, the levels here are constantly changing. They're churning. Heavy stuff tends to sift, it's like a flour sifter. It's just going to sift down through. And so what you end up with is a cultural level with many different times of occupation, many different occupation periods on one level, which shouldn't really happen. And it's not because, like, out in the desert you have that, on a hard pan desert surface, you'll have many different occupation periods on one surface. But that's because there's no vegetation, there's no water to build up loam in the soil. There's you don't have decaying organic matter. You just have hard pan, right? And so that's not the case here. We have vegetation. We have the buildup of loam. But the problem is that because it's all sand, it just doesn't stay in one place. Clay and organic matter keep soil in one place and builds up in levels. And with the sand, it doesn't do that. And so we have just a really, really hard time sifting through and understanding. So we use a lot of dating. Radiocarbon dating is, of course, the go-to for most archaeologists because it's an absolute date. We also have relative dating, which, is kind of like a comparison. You can think of it as we know how old this thing is and how old this thing is. And if this thing is between these two things, then we know it must be this, and that's how they're dating the footprints at White Sands, So we have, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. We have luminescence dating, which kind of reveals the last time a surface saw sunlight. And so that has been used here in the valley. And you can kind of get at, well, if this surface last saw sunlight, say 2,000 years ago, and you take that sample from underneath a stone, say you have a stone wall, and you want to know how old the stone wall is. Well, you can take a sample of soil from underneath that stone. Then you can figure out, well, the wall must have been built at this time because this is the last time the dirt underneath the wall saw sunlight. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So we use those kinds of things in this environment. There have been, since the soil has a lot of water in it, ground penetrating radar is good here. It's not so good in a lot of places in Colorado, but here it works pretty well. So we can determine the presence of deposits below ground surface that aren't apparent on the on the surface. We can find them. So those are the challenges. It's mostly because of the sand. This huge sand pile right here. Yeah.
It's easy on the eyes, though. It's a beautiful sight to look at.
It is. It's real interesting. I mean, you see all the black streaks, that's all magnetite, and I mean, it's just kind of cool, right? And you see all these, it kind of glimmers in certain lights, and I suspect that's probably the gold.
Ah.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we can't go searching for it anymore, thankfully.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite method or a favorite type of scene to search out? You mentioned the soil underneath the wall, dating those types of artifacts. Do you have a favorite story that you like to seek out and learn about here in this park, or just in general when it comes to archaeology?
I like all of it. So in archaeology, we have something called middle range theory. And so for a long time, archaeology was kind of the pastime of the wealthy, think back like Victorian Explorers Club type people that would just go out and, set up and, let's see what we find. And they would just dig it up. And most of that stuff ended up in museums or on the black market or, in somebody's house somewhere. And then, it started to become apparent that, hey, we can actually learn through applied scientific method, take measured recovery and take field notes and document everything you do. And you can start to learn about the past. And so I kind of like the story, the transition of how you take material remains that might look random and just discarded, and create and this is where middle range theory comes in. You start to create a picture of what those people lived like. The story of that site might be only a few weeks long. It might have just been a camp where they were setting up to go on a hunt and bring stuff back and then travel back to their original, wherever their next stop was. It might have been a part of a seasonal round. It might have been like a military campaign, as part of the exploration of the West. And you might I would be really interested to find the campsite for Pike's expedition, because they were camped here for a couple of months somewhere up in the pass. But we don't know which pass, and but that would reveal a lot, because they were lost. They were really lost. So I think those stories that come out of any kind of deep involved, where you can correlate, you can research what was there, you can correlate with maybe ethnohistorical accounts. You can correlate with, other people wrote diaries, and sometimes we find those diaries, and it might reveal entire chapters in our history we had no idea, And so that's really cool. I think that's the coolest part, is the stories about humans.
I agree.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about the technology and different methods that are specifically used here at Great Sand Dunes, and how you carbon date. Is that all done in the park, or do you work with different agencies to be able to tell these stories and to be able to research these stories?
We depend heavily on universities, on our regional staff, because I'm just one person, right, in this park, and this park is huge. And to really be able to understand and then communicate the research that my branch is responsible for, it takes a lot of people, because our job in my branch is to gather the stories, understand the processes that make this park special, and understand the history that makes this park unique, and then communicate it to the interpretive branch so that they can get that story out to the public. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and I feel really honored to be a part of that behind the scenes, world, because it's kind of like working in Disney World, where you get to go backstage. And I mean, I get all the backstage passes, here in the park. It's really cool. So we depend, I don't have a lab where I have, things like, I don't have any, I don't know. There's so many technical words. I'm not going to go into all those because my brain is going blank, but I don't have the equipment. I don't have the tools to get at radiocarbon dates. We have to send those off. So there are labs, there are universities that we work with, there are specialized scientific just that's all they do is run samples, scientific analysis laboratories. We depend on our regional staff to do all the things that we don't have time to do. So, for instance, before last year, before I was hired last year, this park didn't have any archaeological staff. So a lot of the work was handled by our regional staff. And the chief of resources, Fred Bunch, would request assistance from our region, and they would come in and do whatever compliance work was necessary. A lot of work is compliance, and that's under National Historic Preservation Act, Archaeological Resources Protection Act of 1979. Don't pick up artifacts. If you see an artifact, take a photo, but don't pick it up. It protects sites on federal lands. NAGPRA, which is Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, demands that we consult with the tribes on if we find burials or funerary objects or items of cultural patrimony. We consult with the tribes on their repatriation and disposition. So all of those things can't be handled by one person. It's just it takes me a lot longer to do stuff than most people think. So we depend heavily on and even our Washington staff sets policy and guidelines for how to do these things within the framework of the law and within the framework of regulations. We depend heavily on them.
I'm glad you just talked about that, because that was going to be one of my questions. Is national parks aren't just places where a person in your role can't just go and dig up any site that you want. There's policies and processes in place to make sure that you're working with local tribes. And you also had mentioned about visitors not picking up artifacts. There's a very specific reason for that, and that's because context is everything, correct?
Right. Yeah, so if you think of a site, and I really like this analogy. This isn't my analogy. I've heard it from a few different people, and I really like it. And the analogy is like if you think of an archaeological site like a book, and every time you pick up an artifact and take it away, it's like tearing a page or two out of that book. And sometimes people get really overzealous, and they dig holes, and they're looking for stuff that they can sell. And what you're doing when you do that is theft. You're stealing a page of our shared history. Like, federal lands are owned collectively by the American people. We all pay taxes to support them, and it's because they are significant to our collective history as a nation. Every single Park Service unit, it has that behind it. They are chosen and evaluated by Congress, and they are preserved through congressional appropriations and laws that prevent anyone from just coming in and taking what they want and selling it for their own personal gain, right? And there's a huge black market, and that's why, looting in the American Southwest was part of the reason for the Archaeological Resources and Protection Act came into being in 1979. And so that means that you can't go into any federal land. That's Forest Service land, BLM land, Park Service land, Fish and Wildlife, National Wildlife Refuges, Corps of Engineers campgrounds. You can't go onto federal land and just start digging up stuff and taking it home with you, because you're stealing our nation's history. And so if you think of it like that, you start taking pages out of the book, whole chapters out of the book, and you're left with like 3 pages out of an 800-page book. You're not going to be able to understand that story anymore. And Oh, there I go getting verklempt again. Yeah, and it's like it's important to understand who we are and where we've come from, to understand where we're going and to see trends and to see patterns and cyclical behavior that humans like to practice. And that's why it's important to respect those laws.
Beautifully said. I appreciate the passion that you speak with about your profession and the history of people. Have you always been this passionate about history, especially since you've been in archaeology?
I don't know. Maybe not. I think it's I don't know. I was in the Peace Corps, and I took a break from archaeology for a while, went into the Peace Corps. I was in the country of Armenia, and so I guess it's like a love of the understanding of why people are the way they are, and just traveling around. That's why I like to travel. I like to understand, why are people this way? Why do we behave this way? And you can see trends, and it kind of helps me understand myself a little bit better, kind of puts humanity into context.
I love that. We mentioned this name a couple of times in this podcast, Zebulon Pike, and you had mentioned he was way lost in one of the passes up here in the mountains.
Yeah.
For those who are unfamiliar with Zebulon, who was Zebulon Pike? What mission was he on, and why did he get lost in this area?
Well, so Zeb, good old Zeb, he was one of the early, kind of like, think Lewis and Clark. There were a lot of those little expeditions that were sent out. And this is in 1807, to understand more about this landscape that we were claiming as a country. 1807, so just 30 years after the Revolutionary War, and so people are starting to go, I wonder what else is out there. What else can we claim? So this was still part of New Spain, and so it was a military campaign, and he was sent to officially find the Red River. So really lost, like so lost. Came to the mountains, climbed over the pass. He was here, it was January or February of 1807. He had a company of, 15 or 20 men with him, and they camped over the pass in January. It would have been freezing, They got stuck. We don't know much because Zebulon got captured by the Spanish and taken to Chihuahua and then taken to Santa Fe, where he spent like a year. But we haven't found any remains of his camp. They thought he came over Medno Pass, but the other theory is that he might have come over Mosca Pass. But we haven't found it, and I want to find it. That's going to be cool. It's a cool story. He left a big mark in Pueblo, and you can go to Pueblo, Colorado, and see a lot of about Zebulon Pike's story. But yeah, he was one of those early campaigns to better understand this continent. And there were theories that he was sent. Really, his true mission was to spy on the Spanish and kind of understand what they were up to. So, there's all kinds of theories. But yeah, officially he was looking for the Red River. Didn't find it.
The stories like that, what keep you motivated in your profession, especially here at Great Sand Dunes, to uncover the mystery of incredible stories like that one?
Yeah. One of my favorite stories about Spanish colonial is they're just so hilarious. Like the Spanish were a very funny, they were very funny back in the day. Like the late Middle Ages Spanish. I mean, they were, just wandering around, trying to find a bunch of stuff to make their monarchy richer, more wealthy. And they ended up just spending a lot of money and really just bankrupting themselves doing all this, but they had like a really good time doing it. Like one of the best stories came out of my thesis research. One of the first Spanish settlements in the United States was in Pensacola, Florida, before St. Augustine, and it was 1559. And a armada of 12 ships led by Tristan de Luna came up from Veracruz. And so they had only been in the New World, like 50, 60 years, 60 years or so. Been in Mexico about 50 years. Came up to start a colony, and hurricane came in like a month later and wrecked all the ships. They hadn't even unpacked all their ships. So like all of their supplies were lost, all of their building materials were lost. They had brought a lot of Aztec, they might have been slaves. They might have been coerced to come, but they were taken as settlers and to Florida, well, what is now Florida, and to the northern Gulf Coast. And so all those people, they started wandering around looking for other sites to gather supplies from. So they followed the rivers up, couldn't find any people because this was after Cortez. This was after all of the disease, had swept through. So there were a lot of abandoned settlements. So they couldn't find any food. Well, they ended up like eating their horses, eating their tack, and they finally got relief from another Spanish ship. They pleaded to Veracruz to bring them more supplies. And so Tristan de Luna got on the first ship and just left all these people and just said, "See you later." I mean, it's a hilarious story. It's sad, it's heartbreaking, but it's also just what were you all doing, what did you think was going to happen? You just I don't know. There was just very little planning. Yeah. So I like those stories. And I think that's the important part of all this kind of work, is understanding how we all got here, what we're doing, and maybe using those examples as a way to understand how to correct our mistakes before they really get the better of us.
Is there a human story that's specific to this beautiful park behind us and what we're sitting on right now that visitors, you think visitors should hear or understand before coming here to maybe change their perspective on how they view this landscape?
Oh, well, if you think about the dunes as a landmark and think about how visible they are, when you're traveling up Highway 150, there's a point where the dunes reveal themselves to you. And if you can look from that perspective, and then if you go on the other side of the valley, travel up Highway 17, notice how far away you can be and still see the dunes. It's amazing. It's a great landmark. And how many people would have been captivated by that site and been drawn to it. And they knew that water came out of the mountains every year. So this is fresh water in a high desert, and they knew that animals would be drawn to that water. And they knew that they could find a lot of, because the animals were here, because the water was here, they could find all other kinds of food sources. And so people have been drawn here to this dune field for at least 12,000 years. And think about how many people have traveled in the same footsteps that you're walking in, breathing the same air, looking at the same mountains, going, look at all these snowy peaks around us. Isn't that pretty? And how many people would have done the very same thing before you? That's kind of cool, right?
That's very cool. You mentioned earlier the 29 associated tribes with Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. Obviously, their story is theirs to tell here on how they've interacted with this land. But how are ways that those tribes still interacting with the sand dunes today? I believe off camera we talked about, annually they come and collect sand out of these dunes, correct?
Yeah. And I don't know that they would want us to talk about that. But these dunes, I think, would meet the criteria for a traditional cultural place. Or a traditional cultural property. And there's a long definition for that in the regulations. But basically, it means a place that has been used in the past and is still used in the present to maintain a cultural practice, so whether it's sand for certain ceremonies or just to come and behold this amazing wonder. There are, stories connected to the sand dunes. There are stories connected to these mountains. And it continues to draw people here, the descendants of all the people that used to live here. The 29 federally recognized tribes are just a few, of the people that used to that used to practice and live in this landscape. Those are the ones we work with now, but there were many more, and it was way more complicated than we even understand, all those ties to this dune field and what this dune field meant to all those people. Yeah.
As each of your answers have been very well said. But as we begin to wrap this podcast down, I do want to give you the floor and share anything from an archaeological standpoint of getting people interested in archaeology or just encouragement to come enjoy, this beautiful place. And, as you mentioned earlier, recognize that you're in the footsteps of really millions of people from thousands of years before you.
Yeah. So mostly I want people to come here and just sit in awe of how beautiful this landscape is and how many resources exist here because of the water, because of the sand, because of the mountains, and not look at it as a tangible resource to be bought and sold, but something that ties us to this country as a nation. And to appreciate that the Park Service is trying really hard to care for all of those landscapes, to care for this landscape. We have a museum. Like many Park Service units, we have a museum where we collect and retain materials to better tell the story of this park. And we depend heavily on our Western Archeological Collection Center down in Tucson. WAC is our museum curator center, and they have a large collection. They keep collections for other parks. It's all, our mission is to just keep this story alive and be able to pass it down to people through the generations. And we can only do that if we respect it and honor it and continue to work with the ancestral descendants of the people who lived here and our modern day people that tie significance to it as well. I think anybody listening to this podcast are probably lovers of the national parks, and our national parks are jewels. So
They are.
Yeah.
And as Andrew in an earlier podcast said, National Park Service likes to preserve freaks of nature, and this is one of them.
Right. That's right. Yes. A curious freak of nature. Yeah. That's right.
Well, I admire you, Ree, and your passion for archaeology, but more so your passion for the human story and how we can learn from, the past and present, and how we can better understand ourselves, but also understand the people that walk before us. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and join me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. Ree's knowledge and passion for archaeology is really special, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation together. So if you like this type of content, it would mean a whole lot to me if you'd liked, commented, and subscribed. And until next time, safe travels.